In this review, we will look at Borderlands 3, a 2019 looter shooter produced and released on Windows and PlayStation. We will break down this review into several sections, and each will hopefully contribute to informing us whether or not we should buy Borderlands 3. So to begin with, we can look at presentation. The presentation of Borderlands 3 is as we expect now. So you got the usual comic book cartoon style that we are familiar with. It's minimalistic in design and really soft on the eye. Generally speaking, the presentation looks great and the cartoon comic book style is consistent throughout, despite some textual pop-ins here and there I experienced. There's also variation in the presentation. This will often depend on the day and night cycle, as well as the various maps and zones you encounter, each of which have unique palettes and color and tones. So let's speak a bit about narrative. The basic story to Borderlands 3 is that you play as a vault hunter seeking vaults and ultimately what is called the Great Vault. At the beginning of the game, you choose your character and class, which there are four. You have the Siren, Operative, Gunner, and the Beastmaster. I chose the Operative class, and you soon find yourself with a team assembled to aid you on your journey to seek out this Great Vault. But you also have an enemy, so they are also seeking the vault, and they are in competition with you throughout the narrative. They also have the army, which seeks to get in your way to prevent you from attaining your goal. So the antagonists are called the Calypsos. They are twins, a brother and a sister. They have ominous intentions to harness the power of the Great Vault for their own destructive ends. When it comes to narrative in other areas, you find that there are a lot of bright and memorable personalities who contribute to the overall story. Claptrap is always memorable, as are other characters such as Brick, Zero, Maya, Mordecai, Sir Hammerlock, and the rest. Each character that you encounter will offer you unique quests and rewards. So what makes Borderlands 3 so alluring is that it just offers such a large amount of gameplay. There are dozens upon dozens of quests, and that translates into dozens of hours of gameplay. So myself, I must have spent at least 40 to 50 hours in my playthrough. But that's doing almost all of the side quests and the extras, like engaging in arena battles against waves of enemies, and of course the main story. There also are a large number of semi-open world maps and zones throughout that you unlock as you play. Each zone has a unique look, unique enemies, and a varied cast of characters to meet. So Borderlands is especially known for its gunplay, and what can we say about this in Borderlands 3? Very briefly, it is the gunplay is the strongest element to it. Like shotguns feel really punchy when you're up close against enemies. Headshots and with snipers and the splattering effect they produce are hugely satisfying. There's also a great variety of weaponry on offer. You have, for example, various types of shotguns. You have your snipers, heavy machine guns, light machine guns, rocket launchers, and pistols. The guns come from different manufacturers, such as the in-game corporations and organizations called Atlas, Dahl, Hyperion, Jacobs, Maluwan, and a few others. Each weapon has a unique stat or series of stats, whether that be, for example, an extra microscope distance or faster reload. Guns offer some interesting combinations. A sniper rifle can, for example, be switched with a shotgun. A light machine gun can shoot grenades when you reload the weapon. All these stats bring different sort of variation to the gunplay. You have various types of elemental damage. So you have ice, fire, and toxic damage that weapons can do on enemies. Ice, for example, can freeze enemies on the spot, which makes them easier to shoot or to melee. Fire and toxicity damage slowly eat away at the enemy's health, which can also be useful in encounters. What's really great about Borderlands and its gunplay is that it gives you room to experiment, and very soon you will have your own style of play. At one point, you will unlock extra slots to include more weapons in your arsenal layout. Essentially, what Borderlands 3 is a looter shooter. The game just constantly throws weapons and gadgets in your direction. There's no point at which you're not receiving new weapons and better weapons that you can experiment and try out with. And generally speaking, the process is really rewarding. Over time, you increase your firepower and arsenal as you take on new enemies in new encounters and circumstances against whom you can test your weapons. You also have your gadgets. Notably, you have your shield. Shields protect you from incoming damage and gunfire. They also need to be recharged after your character receives damage, which means shields also have stats. So some shields recharge quicker than others in the moment of battle. Some have a greater shield capacity, and so on. You also find perks in loot. These have small improvements that you can add to your character, such as, for example, added critical damage on certain weapon types and weapons made by certain manufacturers. You can get perks that might add 25% extra damage to your marksmanship or provide better handling for your weapons and so on. We can't really speak about combat without referring to the skill tree. So each character has 3 major skill trees, each with a main ability and unlockable sub-abilities. You can unlock sub-abilities as you level up your character in the world just by killing enemies and completing quests. As main skills, for example, I chose to use the Digi-Drone and the Shield Barrier, which is essential to my character, whose name is Zane, and he's an operative. I found these skills really helpful, and as a result did not really vary them in my gameplay. So Digi-Drone I could use on the fly. They all have a small cooldown rate, and once they're available you can use them. So Digi-Drone was great for taking a bit of the incoming fire off me for a few seconds and adding a bit of extra damage to enemies in the environment. The shield barrier also does as one might expect, which is simply to protect you from incoming damage. But of course, players who use different classes can vary up their own skills and find some innovative manner of strategy when dealing in combat encounters. You can equip 2 skills, but that comes at the expense of using a grenade or grenades, or you can use just 1 skill, which gives you the ability to use grenades. That's up to player choice. Then when it comes to enemies, the main antagonists of the game are, as I noted, the Calypso twins. You'll come across them quite often, especially in voiceovers and dialogues. They also make their appearance in quite a few cutscenes throughout the game, which just give you a greater familiarity with their characters and personalities. What is interesting is that the story of Borderlands is serious. Ultimately, you're trying to save the universe, but there's a lack of seriousness in it. So there's obviously that very cartoony feel and that light-hearted approach, especially with the antagonists who have great personality, but in my opinion felt way too cartoony, especially if they were like cartoons made for children. And personally, I like serious games. I prefer games that, really make you feel like a lot is on the line, and the story and narrative builds that up. You don't really get that in Borderlands 3. Then there's also the general enemies, who are broad in that they come in a huge variety. You'll come across enemies that are alien-like. You'll come across bugs, humanoid type enemies, robots, and various monstrous type enemies. At no point was I ever bored from my combat experience, just because there are just so many different enemies, and each of them have varied tactics. For example, some will charge your position, others might hang back behind cover to hit you from a distance, and so on. Just combined with the gunplay, the enemies are so much a joy to engage. I was always looking forward to my next combat encounter, which can be somewhat of a negative thing when at parts of the game you are not engaging in combat and it's more slow paced. You really feel those moments, especially in Borderlands 3 with such good enemy variety and gunplay. Then there are, of course, the boss fights throughout the game. There are quite a number of mini bosses and narrative bosses. You'll come across several of these in the game, and like my impression is that they are spectacles, so you can expect a lot of lights and noise and a lot of activity on the screen when you come across these bosses. But unfortunately, I found them to lack in variety. Often bosses would have me just dodging the same old incoming attacks, which some of them are slow, which means you can dodge out the way, and often you'll find yourself running in circles around the enemy, especially as you're taking damage and you're looking to recharge your shield. So you run around in circles and you rinse and repeat. I think when it comes to the replay value and the value for money, as I said, there are dozens of hours of gameplay here, and I believe this alone warrants any current price tag that is being asked. Borderlands 3 is a good game. It's well polished. There are some issues with texture pop-ins and a few bugs here and there, but generally speaking, it's a polished game and it has a lot to offer. I can also see a great deal of replayability. So, for example, different classes have different skill trees, as I said, which can invite experimentation. And the gunplay is just so excellent that you always want to come back for more, even once you've completed the main storyline. And that means I can really recommend Borderlands 3.